So now we have the explanation for selection 1. And I trust you've spent enough time thinking on it, noodling on it, that it's starting to give you some insight. Now they talk about these rules, and they are for all followers on the path, and they come to us from those who know. Great wisdom, as ancient as it may be, contains within it all kinds of truths, and so effectively it remains timeless, okay? So before the eyes can see with clear vision, they must have grown incapable of tears of wounded pride, unkind criticism, unmerited abuse, unfriendly remarks, slights, sarcasm, the annoyances of everyday life, the failures and disappointment of everyday existence. Now give yourself a minute and think about how full is life of these things. Now, somebody wrote once, if it's not going to be relevant in 5 years' time, what are you getting upset about it now for? Okay? Let's pay attention to that. We do not mean that one should harden himself against these things. On the contrary, hardening forms no part of these teachings. On the material plane, the more finely constituted one may be, the more keenly does he feel the pain of life, coming not from within so much, but from without. We are living in a world that is full of upset, that is full of suffering, that is full of pain. And if he attempts to fight back, to pay off these backbitings and pinpricks in like kind, the more does he become enmeshed in the web of the material life. How often has that worked for you? His only chance of escape lies in growing so that he may rise above that plane of existence and dwell in the upper regions of the mind. This does not mean he should run away from the world. On the contrary, if one attempts to run away from the world before he has learned its lessons, he will be thrust back into it again and again and again, until he settles down to perform the tasks at hand. But, nevertheless, one of spiritual attainment may be that he so live that although he's in the midst of the fight of everyday life, even be the captain in the struggle, he really lives above it all, sees it for just what it is, sees it as but a childish game of childlike men and women. And although he plays the game well, he still knows it to be a game and not the real thing at all. This being the case, he begins by smiling through his tears when he is knocked down in the rush of the game. Then he ceases to weep at all, smiles taking the place of tears. For when things are seen in their true relation, one can scarcely repress a smile at himself and at or with others. When one looks around and sees the petty playthings to which men are devoting their lives, believing that these playthings are real, he cannot help but smile. And when one awakens to a realization of the reality of things, his own particular part, which he is compelled to play, must evoke a smile from him. These are not mere dreams and impracticable ideas. If you had any idea of how many men high in the puppet play of worldly affairs have awakened, really awakened to the truth, it would surprise you. Many of these men and women play their part well, with energy and apparent ambition, for they realize that they are necessary parts of the machinery of evolution. But deep within the recesses of their mind, they know it all for what it is. One must be brave and must acquire a mastery over the emotional nature. Let me read that again. One must be brave and acquire a mastery over one's emotional nature. We live in a world that is fraught with what some Some commentators talk about fear porn. Be afraid of disease, be afraid of everybody, be afraid of men, or be afraid of women, or be afraid of the bad guys over there, and be afraid of all sorts of things. This stirs the emotional body, and it takes you away from sound thinking and sound judgment. This precept does not merely refer to physical tears, for they often spring to the eyes involuntarily, though we may be smiling at the time. It refers to the feeling that there is anything for us to really cry over. It is the thought behind the tears rather than the tears themselves. The lesson to be learned from these rules is that we endeavor to rise above the incidence of personality and strive to realize our individuality, that we desire to realize the I am consciousness, which is above the annoyances of personality. That we learn that these things cannot hurt the real self, the true self, for they will be washed away by the sands of time and by the waters of eternity. Likewise, our ear must lose its sensitiveness to the unpleasant incidents of personality before it can hear the truth clearly and freely from the jarring noises of the outward strife. One must grow to be able to hear these things and yet smile, secure in the knowledge of the I am and its powers and its destiny. One must grow to be able to see or hear the unkind word, the unjust criticism, the spiteful remark, without letting them affect his real self. He must keep such things on the material plane to which they belong and never allow himself to descend where he may be affected by them. One must also learn to be able to hear the truths which are sacred to him, spoken of sneering and contemptuously by those who do not understand. They cannot be blamed, for they cannot understand. Let the babies prattle and scold and laugh. It does them good and cannot hurt you or the truth. Let the children play. It is their nature. Someday they will, like you, have experienced the growing pains of cosmic maturity and will be going through just what you are now. You were once like them. They will be just like you in due course. Follow the old saying and let such things go in one ear and out the other. Do not let them reach your real consciousness. Then will the ear hear the things intended for it. It will unfold a clear passage for the entrance of the truth. Before the voice can speak, it must have lost its power to wound. The voice that scolds and lies and abuses and complains and wounds can never reach the higher planes upon which dwell the advanced intelligences of our race. Before it can speak so as to be heard by those high in the order of life and cosmic intelligence, it must have long since forgotten how to wound others by unkind words, petty spite, and unworthy speech. The advanced man does not hesitate to speak the truth, even when it's not pleasant, if it seems right to do so, and he intuitively knows that it is the appropriate thing to do. But he speaks in the tone of a loving brother who does not criticize from the I'm holier than thou position, but merely feels the other's pain, sees his mistake, and wishes to lend him a helping hand. Such a one has risen above the desire to talk back, to cut another by unkind and spiteful remarks, to get even by saying, in effect, you're not enough. These things must be cast aside like a worn-out cloak. The advanced man needs them not. Love is one of the greatest privileges of man, and as he advances, his love of nature grows until it finally includes all of life. The heart referred to is the emotional nature and the instinctual mind. These things seem to be such a part of us before we develop that to get rid of them, we seem to literally tear out our hearts. We part with first one thing and then another of the old animal nature. with pain and suffering, and our feet become literally washed in the blood of the heart. Appetites, cravings, desires, old habits, conventionalities, inherited thoughts, racial delusions, and things in the DNA must be thrown off, one by one, sometimes with much misgiving and doubt at first, and with much pain and heart bleeding, until we reach a position from which we can see what it all means. Transcend duality. The whole of consciousness must be transformed down into the depths of the unconscious. Transcend duality. Not only the desires of the lower self are to be torn out, but we must, of necessity, part with many things that have always seemed dear and sacred to us, but which now appear as but childish imaginings in the pure light which is beginning to be poured out from our higher mind. But even though we see things for what they are, still it pains us to part with them, and we cry aloud and our hearts bleed. Then we often come to the parting of the ways, a place where we are forced to part mental company with those who are dear to us, leaving them to travel their own road while we take step upon a new path of thought. Because he who would be what he wants to be must cease to be what he is. Listen to this one again. Because he who would be what he wants to be must cease to be what he is. You need to forego the old in order to embody a new package that takes on this new part of your awakening self. All this causes the heart to bleed, and all these things come from your awakening. The man of the material plane has felt none of these things, has seen them not. Then, when the feet of awareness have been bathed in the blood of the heart, the eye begins to see higher truths. The ear begins to hear them. The tongue begins to be able to speak them to others and to converse with those who advanced long before them. And you, the I Am, is able to stand erect and gaze into the face of other advanced people. For it has begun to understand the mysteries of life, the meaning of it all. Has been able to grasp something of the great plan. We call this the divine design. Has been able to feel the consequences and the consciousness of one's own existence. Has been able to say, I am, with meaning. Has conquered pain by rising above it. Take these thoughts with you. Dwell upon them. Integrate them into your consciousness until truth sinks into your mind, that it may take root, grow, blossom, and bear fruit.